Hello, this is your host, Todd Lewis of the Praise of Folly podcast. I'm joined again by Logos, Keith Preston, and Terminal Philosophy. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Hit the notification bell. Don't forget to check out my locals where you can follow for updates and support the channel. And for those that already support, thank you for your support. It keeps the channel going. So today we're going to discuss the leaked SCOTUS opinion of Justice Alito on Roe v. Wade. Now, Logos, you and I about a week ago had a private conversation on this where you sort of spitballed the possible reasons why it was leaked and who might have leaked it. And I thought you did a pretty good job on that. So we'll throw the ball to you first.
All right, cool. So when thinking about this, the first thing I do is like an economist is think who has what to gain from this happening. And after thinking about it, I think every single faction involved in this has something to gain from this happening. So I mean, let's just start with the left, right? So a left-wing Supreme Court clerk could have leaked this because maybe they think it's too close for comfort that this might be overturned, and the left might have leaked this to bring this to public consciousness while like the Democrats still have control of the Congress, basically, so they can work with the president to pack the courts or threaten to before it's too late. It could have been a left-wing justice that did it while in negotiations with the other ones, because a lot of them come to like initial opinions, but they spend a long time like negotiating votes and things like that. This could have been a negotiation tactic to put pressure on the right to say, hey, look, this is what's going to happen, especially Roberts. Like Justice Roberts is rumored to be very susceptible to public opinion. And so if he was keen on flipping this, then the left, putting public opinion in the spotlight might cause Roberts to renege on that to save what, quote, the integrity of the court, which seems to be like his modus operandi. Now on the right, you could have like a right court clerk doing this because he or she or whatever felt that the conservative justices were going to lay over on this one, right? Now, I mean, imagine if you're like a Trump voter or somebody on the right who's been playing the long game trying to get court justices forever until you finally got your conservative majority. This has finally come up. The pitch is wound up. You're going to bat. It's just like you're not even a swing, right? Like that'd just be silly. We've done one thing. We've done everything you asked for the last, I don't know how many decades, to play the long game, to get these court justices in for one thing. Conservatives have had like one eye on the prize, and that's the overturning of Roe. And if it looked like the justices were going to renege on it when they had the power to do basically the main thing the conservative base asked for, I could see a conservative clerk wanting to leak that to say, no, you can't do that. Now, I can also see a conservative justice doing this if it looked like a left-wing justice was threatening to, pack the court response to this doing it. Maybe the conservatives are winning. The left is like, okay, if you do this, we're going to work with Biden. We're going to do a public circuit. We're going to try to get the court packed and you'll never have power again or something. Well, at that point, it'd be too late. So maybe the conservative justice would say, well, listen, if you're going to threaten to pack the court, we're just going to leak what's going on right now, get this into the public. And then so your threats of court packing are now going to be laced with intimidation of Supreme Court justices, because that's exactly what's going on. That's exactly what everybody knew would happen, right? And it's very, very hard to make an argument for physically packing the court with more justices at the same time that it looks like a segment of the population is physically intimidating them to get what they want. The juxtaposition of those two isn't good politics. And so I could see a conservative justice also having done this. So I don't really see an argument that it must have been one side or the other, because everybody kind of had good reasons for doing it. And I think that was mostly what I covered when I spitballed it with you earlier. Yeah.
All right. Keith, why do you think it was leaked?
Well, if I had to put money on it, I would guess that it was probably an employee of the Supreme Court who was probably sympathetic to the pro-choice position. I'd be a bit surprised if a member of the Supreme Court actually leaked the decision. And I'd also be a bit surprised if it was somebody who was more on the conservative side, or at least the pro-life side, because I think they would be more concerned about sabotaging the process. That whole episode just had the flavor of some assistant to one of the justices coming across this opinion and saying, "Oh no, they're actually going to do it. They're actually going to overturn Roe v. Wade. We got to get this out, And I mean, as for what the motivation would be for leaking it, I think it's obvious. I think that person was hoping that there would be a public outcry from the left against overturning Roe, or from moderate Republicans or whomever, people who are on the pro-choice side. And I think they were perhaps hoping that the Democrats would see that, oh no, Roe might be overturned, so we better pass a national law mandating that abortion is legal throughout the United States, codifying the abortion rights as a national law. That's, to me, seems to be the most sensible, or the most not the most sensible, the most plausible explanation for why there was a leak, because that was a very unusual circumstance. And while I don't know that it was illegal to leak all that, it does go against the institutional protocols that the court has. And I agree with Logos that if there's any number of people who could have had some kind of motivation, but the one that's by far the most plausible, I think, is that you had a crusader court clerk who sees that Roe's on the verge of being overturned, and they want to take action, either so the public will pressure the court into not doing it, or so the Democrats will take action, particularly since a lot of people are predicting the Democrats are going to get slaughtered in the midterm elections this year. They were probably thinking, well, if the Democrats are going to be put out of office in the midterms, we've got to make sure that they codify Roe into national law as federal legislation before they leave. That strikes me as what's most likely to have happened, because having known so many people from that viewpoint for so long, I know how they see Roe v. Wade. They look at it like the repeal of Roe is like a fascist coup or something like that. It's like the Taliban taking over America or something. It's in fact, I remember way back in 1992 when the Casey decision was issued, which upheld Roe v. Wade, which was sort of modified it a bit. Justice Harry Blackmun, who actually wrote the original Roe v. Wade decision, he was still on the Supreme Court at that time. And in his own opinion, or concurring opinion, he said, well, a cloud of darkness was hanging over us, but we were saved at the last minute, by a ray of light. This very rhetorical, kind of almost apocalyptic view of the issue, like the sky is falling if Roe is overturned. And a lot of people from the pro-choice side do have that kind of fanatical attachment to Roe. So, and somebody who was probably a relatively young court clerk for one of the liberal Supreme Court justices, that's just the kind of person who would have that kind of mindset. And I suspect that's where it probably came from.
All right, terminal philosophy. What are your thoughts on this question?
Right. Well, I generally agree with the hypothesis that it was likely leaked by a politically motivated court employee, most likely by a self-described left-winger, and it could have come from a higher element in the U.S. government, or the so-called deep state, basically in order to win more public support for the Democrats in the midterm elections. And I think everyone's fairly well aware of the projections of the results of the midterms, with the Democrats just getting blasted in both the House and the Senate, and they don't really. I think that they can only lose something like 1 or 2 seats. And forgive me for not knowing the exact number, but the Democrats can only afford to lose, I think, something like 1 or 2. So, anyways, but the Democrats just have an abysmal public approval right now. In general, Congress does too. Congress has a lower trust than, I think, cable news. So that's how dire things really are. I think a lot of people were hoping that this would, the intimidation of the justices would be strong enough to rescind their support for overturning Roe v. Wade. So, but I agree with everything that you guys have said thus far. But overall, I think that it was done tactically, and not just out of some sort of political passion, or out of some sort of idealism. It was definitely done to take care of, or at least an attempt to address the situation in the midterms. And also, I'll also echo what Keith was saying, that it presented the opportunity for the Democrats to pass some sort of national law regarding abortion. But those are my initial thoughts.
Sure. So now, obviously, it's criminal to directly threaten Supreme Court justices in their homes, but obviously people are doing it, and for the time being, seem to be getting away with it. So, Logos, why do you think that's happening? Do you think it's because somebody on the inside wants that to happen and is sheltering these people, or do you think that the system is just that fragmented that it can't stop them?
I think it's a bit of both. Um, I mean, rhetorically, right? So I don't know if you guys have seen the same rhetoric on this one that I have, but the rhetoric is the Supreme Court ruled on a case where it was okay to protest like abortion doctors or something at their homes, and you can protest abortion clinics, you can protest all these other things, right? So this might be some kind of a Linsky tactic or something that just says like use your opponent's rules against them. So like yes, it's illegal on paper to do this, but it's legal on paper for you to do it to these other people. And so now to enforce this law, you're going to have to uphold some kind of greater meta legal hypocrisy here. Is going to be the point. Um, as far as why is this allowed to happen? I mean, it could be the system wants it to happen. I mean, Democrats, as far as I'm concerned, like the current order of things, and so they have no reason to stop it. They'll look like hypocrites, given the other reason logic, if they step in to stop it. But also, like, just thinking about this, I mean, the left is a coalition-based movement, and one a core constituency of their movement, very pro-choice feminist types, has been threatened. And if the left does not stick up for this part of their constituency, it's in the same way that we have the Russia-Ukraine discussion, right? So if Russia invades somebody and there's like an understanding that they'll be protected and they aren't, that makes the rest of the alliance look weak. It's the same thing with the left. If the left isn't allowed to stick up for this coalition in like the biggest way possible, that could fracture the alliance. And so it could be the case that even if the system wanted to stop it, I don't know if they do, it would fragment the alliance to such a degree that they're not going to.
All right, Keith, what are your takes on that?
Well, it's an interesting question. Um, we some of the Supreme Court justices that have been protested at their homes actually live in Virginia, where I live, and our governor Youngkin is a Republican. He's Catholic. He's pro-life, or at least that's what he says. Who knows what he really believes? But he has said, well, that it's legal to do that. It's actually legal to protest at someone's house if you want. Although I actually saw a copy of a federal law that apparently says no, that there is a federal law against using intimidating tactics against federal officials on a personal level. If theoretically you're interfering with them doing their job or something like that. So it does seem to be fairly murky as far as the actual law. But I think the real reason, though, is the Democrats currently control the federal government. They control the Justice Department and all of that, and it's Republican justices that are being picketed. Now, let's imagine it was the other way. Let's imagine that a conservative clerk to, say, Justice Alito or Thomas or one of them leaked something that said, "Oh no, that they're actually going to vote to uphold Roe v. Wade." So you had a bunch of pro-life types, Republicans, conservatives, evangelicals, the most seriously pro-life people. Let's say they go and they protest at the house of Justice Kagan or Justice Sotomayor or one of those. Well, what would happen? It would be on MSNBC and CNN every night about how there's now a wave of domestic terrorism against Supreme Court justices who are just trying to uphold the law and protect the civil rights of women. And first, it's bad enough we had white supremacist terrorism. Now we've got this, male supremacist terrorism or whatever. I think that's probably, and the DOJ would probably open an investigation of it. But I think that because we have a Democratic administration, that is, one reason why it's simply being overlooked. I think probably a lot of the people in the Democratic administration want the protests to happen outside the justices' homes. I mean, they want to intimidate the justices into not overturning Roe. In fact, some of the actual members of Congress have tried to do that. I mean, remember there was a few years ago, there was a situation where Charles Schumer, who is by far one of the scummiest people in Congress. But Charles Schumer actually stood out in front of the Supreme Court, and he was calling the Supreme Court justices by names, the ones, the Republican ones, and he was basically making threats. We're coming for you. So I mean, if anything, I suspect they probably want this to happen.
All right, terminal philosophy. Your thoughts?
Right. Well, the whole atmosphere of the public reaction to the leak has just been inflated to the point of like what he said earlier, to be like some sort of quasi coup fascistic takeover of some sort of critical element of government. And it takes hardly any effort on the part of the media to catastrophize this to be like some sort of like all or nothing. This is it. This is like not one step backwards, Stalingrad type of a situation. Or at least that's the level of desperation that they're trying to impose on people. When in fact, I mean, the reality is, if it goes back to the states, well, about half of the nation will probably be pro-choice and half will be pro-life. And just looking at it broadly, statistically, it's for women, as far as the support for abortion, it's about 50-50. Or I've seen other statistics that sway one way or the other, but basically, I mean, it really is kind of like 51-49, 50-50. So, I mean, that's really more the material reality of it. But yeah, I mean, I think that it's also just a sort of I do believe that it's some sort of at least a trial run or a test run to see if political intimidation or even physical intimidation is still a viable tactic these days. And so yeah, I mean, but when you've got the media and all these sort of ridiculous corporate supported talking heads saying that this is if we don't do anything about this is the end. And so of course it's gonna mobilize all of the it's going to mobilize the most animated people on the left wing. But yeah, I think we'll keep it at that.
Yeah, that's a good point there. A couple points to be made here is that the way the left, see, this is what the left does, and it doesn't understand. It assumes that because it is the approved mouthpiece for certain minority groups, that it speaks for them. So they were shocked when Trump got elected and won more Hispanic and Black votes than any Republican since before Reagan. And they're going to be surprised that, as you pointed out, Terminal, it's like 50-50 split for women. It's not like, quote unquote, this is, women want abortion and men don't, or more specifically, Christian men don't. It's like, no, there's a lot of women in this country that don't want abortion legal either. The other thing, too, is that the actual ruling would just devolve the choice of abortion back to the states, which anybody, if they remember, that's what Ron Paul's position was in 2012. And so that doesn't mean that there wouldn't, quote, be abortion throughout the country. What it does mean, though, is that in a lot of states, red and purple states, it would be gone tomorrow, because they have a lot of clauses where it's like, well, if Roe v. Wade it goes away, we're going to outlaw abortion. But then there'll be blue states in which, you'll have third trimester abortions and partial birth abortions tomorrow. So you will see that. And what you'll probably also see is, because of the violence in the cities, because of the defunding of the police, there's been a lot of blue flight to red states. But that could easily be reversed, because if these red states have these very strict anti-abortion laws, abortion only for the sake of the life of the mother or something, then they'll go back. And because they're going to want to have, their partial birth abortions in like California and Oregon. And so what's interesting is you could see the people that were predicting the doom and gloom of like these states turning purple because of the blue wave coming in, they'll leave again because they're going to want to stay with the abortion. And so what would likely happen, and I'll give this to you next, Logos, is I predict that in the blue states and in the red states, we're going to see the extreme of both positions occur rather quickly. We're going to see the red states have a total ban on abortion. The purple states will be probably trending towards banning it. I think Ohio, which is a purple state, would pretty much ban it the next day. But then you'd have like the coasts mostly. People say, yeah, we're going to have partial birth abortion now. And that isn't going to solve the problem, but we would see this accelerant process where Roe v. Wade, in some sense, I guess, is holding back. It's serving in a sort of, conservative function at this point. So what I would predict is that if it is overturned, we're getting ahead of ourselves here, we haven't had the vote yet, but if it does get overturned, that's what I predict to see with the sussing out with the states. So your thoughts on that, Logo?
Yeah, it strikes me, riffing off what you guys have been saying about the states. I mean, Casey's trimester system has been restrictive on left-wing states that want more lenient abortions. And so if it gets overturned, like you've been saying, that they'll be better off than worse off. So why all this? And I think the answer is it's not really about Roe v. Wade. What it's about is it's symbolic, right? Roe v. Wade, almost more than anything else, symbolizes the left's ability to centralize morality into a single institution and kind of legislate it from the bench, right? We can legislate morality that all the country has to agree with, and we can legislate it in an untouchable way because there's just no way the right or whoever is getting 2/3 of the Senate to make a constitutional amendment or something. It's just not going to happen. And so we can kind of like make these laws out of whole cloth right here, and you're just forced to live with it. It's like the ultimate expression of left-wing dominance over society that this is the case. Overturning this, regardless of the material implications of abortion, basically shuts that off. Like, you can no longer do that. We have to actually follow legal precedent. Now you can't write laws out of whole cloth. And so that whole gravy train is gone. And now suddenly you have to get back to like plurality politics, look for consensus of states, push things through in the Senate, and so on. And that, I think, is the biggest change that's going to happen when it's reverted, on top of the obvious of states getting more or less extreme and so on, that they're really not happy with.
Right. Keith, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I think the scheme Todd outlined about how a post Roe v. Wade set of policies nationwide would go was probably fairly accurate. One issue I see is this, and this is a point I've tried to make to a lot of more libertarian types, and that is, if you look at how Roe came into being, you essentially have a system where you have 9 people who are appointed for life. They're basically a junta, and they are imposing a uniform system of law on a continent-wide state of 330 million people about something on which there is zero public consensus, or moral consensus, or ideological consensus, and where in fact the public, excuse me, and where in fact the public is split down the middle in terms of their opinions on this. Like, if you look at public opinion polls about abortion, you see that the public has pretty much been split 50-50 on that issue for as long as Roe v. Wade's been around, about half a century, even though public opinion has shifted quite a bit on other things, like, say, gay marriage or something like that. It's still about roughly 50-50 on the abortion issue. Well, I mean, there are varying degrees of extremes, of course, but if you wanted to break it down, whether people are just pro-life or pro-choice, it's about 50-50. So the pro-choice side, I think, wants to use the Supreme Court as basically a junta that's simply going to impose what they consider to be progressive values on everyone, everywhere. And I think that the narrative that Todd outlined, where, let's say, Roe was actually repealed, I think probably what you would get out of that, if it was left up to the states, is probably half the states would veer towards the pro-life side. The other half probably more towards the pro-choice side, either somewhat moderately, or in some places, like Todd said, you'd have people trying to legalize infanticide and all that kind of stuff. In fact, we had a Democratic governor here in Virginia before the current governor. He was basically trying to do that. So I do think you'd find places where you had really extreme policies on abortion. You'd have like Mississippi, where it's a capital crime to have an abortion. In Oregon, well, you can have an abortion if the woman goes into labor. You can have partial birth abortions. So it's you would see those kinds of extremes, but I don't think even that would settle the issue. I don't think it would be an issue of, well, everybody's just going to go their own way and do their own thing, because for a lot of reasons. First of all, the left is not going to be willing to accept that there's going to be some pro-life states, because they don't believe in states' rights anyway. The left views abortion as a sacred right. I mean, to them, the idea of outlawing abortion is like putting the Taliban in power, forcing women to wear burqas, that kind of thing. It's, so to them, banning abortion would be like repealing the Civil Rights Act of 1964 or something like that. I mean, to them, it's unthinkable. Like if you ask somebody from the liberal side, well, should the states be able to have the right to have racial segregation if they want? They say, of course not. So, and that's how they view the abortion issue as well. But it's also true, I think, for the conservative side, that the conservative side, many people on the pro-life side literally view abortion as murder. Right now, people who think abortion is murder, they're not really going to be okay with some states saying murder is okay. Like I've discussed that with different people before. Like I'll ask people from the left, okay, well, do you believe rape is a crime? And they're like, of course. I'm like, well, would you be okay with, say, some states, like maybe a fairly conservative one like Louisiana, would you be okay with them just saying, yeah, we're going to legalize rape? You can just do all the rapes you want here. If they want to ban rape in California, that's fine. But we're going to have legalized rape in Louisiana. Well, almost nobody from the left would think that was acceptable. Right? But that's how a lot of really seriously, strongly pro-life people view the abortion issue. Right? So I think both sides, the seriously pro-life people, the seriously pro-choice people, are going to push for a national law that gets whatever they want. The pro-life side is going to push for a national law banning abortion, just like trafficking heroin is illegal at the federal level. And then the other side, the pro-life side, is probably going to try to, the pro-choice side, is probably going to push for a national law that would be something like the equivalent of the Civil Rights Act, where you have a national law that says no state, no private institution can ban abortion, whatever. No, Catholic hospitals are required to perform abortions. I suspect that that's what the left ultimately wants. So it's not going to go away, even if Roe is repealed, and even if there's no national law, you're going to see constant battles in the individual states over this stuff, particularly the purple states. You may have some states where it's an overwhelming majority one way or the other, but some places, the purple states are really going to be the real battlegrounds because public opinion is going to be split down the middle on this. Also, I don't even think it's going to stay at the states. I think that probably if some states ban abortion, the larger cities are going to try to be abortion sanctuary cities, because let's say Texas bans abortion, which I think they already have or trying to. All right, I could very easily see Austin or San Antonio or Dallas or one of those saying, well, we're not going to go along with that. We're just going to be an abortion sanctuary city. Of course, then the state of Texas could prohibit the individual cities from doing that, but then they probably could defy that too. They can say, what are you going to do? Send in the state guard or something? I also think that there will be people in, I think blue states will be trying to create programs that fund abortions for people from red states. In fact, I've even seen plans for that in the works. I've seen I think California and some other states are actually trying to pass legislation or policies or something where, they'll provide abortions for people from out of state, free of charge or state funded or something like that. And I would imagine also that in some of the red states, they might pass a law against traveling to another state to have an abortion, or maybe even if they can't legally ban you from traveling to another state, they might ban, say, soliciting travel to another state to get an abortion, because at the federal level, there are federal laws against traveling to other countries to do things that are illegal in the United States, like child sex trafficking or something like that. So turning it over to the states is just going to create this national smorgasbord of different policies. And then within each of those little hubs, there's also going to be an ongoing battle between the different factions. And then whoever gets the upper hand here and there's still going to be efforts to defy it from one way or the other. And then at the national level, you're still going to have both sides trying to exercise control there. Well, it's going to be a mess, is what I'm saying.
A mess, yeah. Terminal philosophy.
Yeah, totally agreed. I think your prediction, Todd, is a decent one. And in thinking about this, it's generally true to say that since the 1970s, with of course some exceptions in mind, that many on the left prefer the courts to form laws, around cultural issues as opposed to putting disputes up for a vote. I've always found it sort of peculiar that people in these conversations about Roe versus Wade The plaintiff in Roe v. Wade ended up fabricating her entire story. And she admitted as much in a memoir. And, I think she became some sort of like born again Christian variety later on in her life. I think she died in something like 2013 or 2014. But, she had something of a sordid life. And, she just described her drug use and, sort of hedonistic lifestyle choices. And anyways, but she fabricated the entire story, and she detailed this in multiple interviews. And so where I'm going with this is that I have a hunch that, if the roles were reversed and it was the right that, where it was holding the higher ground on this type of law, and it was, the right is mobilizing a ton of people to, defend a lie, the left would be flipping out as hard as you can possibly imagine. So, at least, if the story itself for Roe, I forget the plaintiff's real name, but if in fact it was all just a bunch of BS, then at least let's put it up for a vote. And what will likely happen is, as you said before, it'll just become a state. It'll just return to the states, and I think what you will see is a sort of this intensification of, like in New York State, it'll probably be like, New York City, Albany, and the entire state itself will just be, completely pro-choice. There shouldn't be any issues. You could probably, some of these places like Oregon and New York and California, they might even try to go somewhat extreme in the sense that, you can get like very late term abortions. And then, as Keith also pointed out, I think to be fair and just, sort of broadly analytical, a lot of these other more conservative states, who knows? I doubt that the rape and incest thing would be, I doubt they're going to be forcing births, but there certainly are certain elements of the right that do feel that way about abortion. And so, yeah, it's a horrible mess, but, the culture war just in general is about to get a lot more crazy and schizophrenic due to Roe v. Wade alone.
All right. Now, we talked about one scenario if it does pass. Let's say it doesn't. We'll toss that to you, Logos. Let's say Roe v. Wade isn't overturned.
If it's not overturned at this point, I predict the end of, quote, nice conservative politics. Because the entire conservative project, for as long as I've been aware of it, is play the legal, political, long game, focus on the states, senators, focus on state governments to try to make it easier to elect state senators, to try to make it easier to nominate Supreme Court justices, to approve Supreme Court justices, to get abortion overturned. If decades down the line they've done this, they got their Amy Coney Barretts, they got their Gorsuch or whoever else, they got like all the conservative justices they want to get to make this happen. At the end of the day, it doesn't happen, right? And they were promised a decades full of basically lies. Then what do conservatives have to look forward to in politics anymore, right? If everything they've done, if all the tactics, all the long game playing within the confines of the law didn't get what they wanted because the justices caved to political pressure, public pressure, the left threatens to pack the court. What stops them from making that happen? It doesn't matter at that point. It doesn't matter what stopped them from making that happen, because what that means is decades of political discipline doesn't amount to anything. So if the only lesson the conservatives could learn, the only single one, is that any change they want to see cannot come from political institutions. And so I predict a rise of political violence if that happens, because there's no reason, there's no longer any incentive to play within the framework of the rules, and so the rules go out the window.
All right, Keith, let's say Roe v. Wade is upheld. What do you see happening?
Well, I definitely think the conservative side would see that as a stab in the back. In fact, one thing that I think is interesting about that is I've always thought that the leadership of the Republican Party, the real leadership, like the donor class and all of that, I've always thought they could care less about abortion. And in fact, a lot of them are probably pro-abortion or pro-choice or whatever. A lot of them have probably paid for more abortions than most people have children. But I think they always used the pro-life issue and a number of other perhaps comparable issues as a means of creating a base for themselves. That is, creating a voter bloc of pro-life people or whatever. And I've always thought they were basically taking these people for a ride. I always thought that basically the Republican Party is about the military-industrial complex, and it's about the corporate elite. And they could care less about these more conservative social issues, but they use those people as constituents because they need their votes. But the thing is, they cultivated this relationship with, say, the pro-life movement, where they always said, yeah, we're with you, we're going to give you your justices. But then it got to the point where the Republicans more or less had to put up or shut up. And Trump really proved to be a pivotal factor in that. It just so happened that Trump got to appoint 3 Supreme Court justices. I suspect that if whoever got elected in 2016 had been a Republican other than Trump, like let's say it was just one of the regular Republicans, I suspect whoever they appointed to the Supreme Court might have been people that weren't as likely to overturn Roe v. Wade. They probably, like if it had been Jeb Bush who became president in 2016, they probably would have appointed people to the Supreme Court that they were just there because they're business conservative. We want people that are going to uphold laws restricting labor organizing and that kind of thing. And if they can give lip service to the pro-life cause, fine. But what we want are business conservatives. Trump really wasn't playing that Republican Party game. He could care less about the Republican Party. He's just all about himself and his own movement. All right, so he stepped into that game, and he was like, okay, if I want these pro-life people behind me, I better give them what they want. All right, so he just happened to be in a position where he could do that. And I think that unusual turn of history is more or less what has led to the current situation, where Trump just happened to step in as this maverick in the Republican Party at the right time, and just happened to be in a position to appoint 3 new justices at the right time. And he could care less about playing the standard Republican game. He just wants to build a loyal base for himself, and he knows he has to do this in order to make that happen. So he did. And I suspect there's a whole lot of Republican politicians and donors and others who are thinking, wow, why did this happen to have to happen right now? We were going to sweep in the midterms. This is, I suspect a lot of your Mitch McConnell types are probably disappointed when that leak came out. They're like, we really don't want this to happen now. But I do think if they were to not overturn Roe, I think Logos is right. The conservative side, certainly the hardcore. I mean, conservatism is more pro-life, but if there's one issue that the Republican Party base is strongly committed to, it's the pro-life thing. There's probably more agreement on that issue among just rank and file hardcore Republican voters than anything else. And if the courts, that have a 6-3 Catholic Republican majority, if they were to not vote to overturn Roe v. Wade, I do think the conservative side, or certainly the pro-life side, will look at it like, what's the point? What's in it for us? And I think that you might see a renewed wave of, say, anti-abortion violence or something. We had that in the past, but that could make a comeback. But although I think that would be symptomatic of something else, and that is a point that I've tried to make in other forums is this, and that is that for any kind of democratic process of whatever kind to work, the losing team has got to be willing to lose gracefully. Like the losing team has got to think, okay, the rules of the game are fair. And if our team loses, well, we lost fair and square, and our team will get another shot in the future. Any game has to operate according to those basic standards to work. But increasingly in the United States, and not just about abortion, a lot of things, you have a situation where the different sides look at it like, no, the system is rigged against us. The other side is rigging the system against us, whether through voter suppression or court packing or, tampering with election machines or, whether it's true or whether it's made up or whatever. That's how the different sides view each other increasingly. Also, just in terms of values, the two sides view each other as existential enemies. Like the two sides don't view each other as, honorable opponents with whom they simply disagree. No, the other side are mortal enemies. This is war. they are a threat to our way of life. That both sides view the other in that way. And I think that if Roe is not overturned by I guess again, a majority Republican of supposed devout Catholic pro-life people, if even they do not overturn Roe v. Wade, I think the conservative side, a whole lot of people on that side are just going to say, why bother? This is war.
All right, terminal philosophy.
All right. Well, I think it's a bit difficult for me to add much more to that, other than I completely agree with what both Logos and Keith have said. Unfortunately, the state of politics in the United States is so frustrating that both sides have convinced themselves that they're on the brink of annihilation, and so they have to execute extreme measures in order to survive. So I think the Republican Party and conservatives in general, if Roe v. Wade is not overturned, they'll feel that they're out of political options, and then they'll basically, I guess you'll see more things like political violence, and I don't think you'll see this like in every single city, but you like the what is it called in Portland, like the Patriot Prayer. They'll out of spite and retaliation, they'll want to go beat up Antifa, or vice versa. You'll see more things like that, I'm sure, and you might even see some more like abortion clinic violence around there, or something that you've seen that was around the past, like in the 80s, with abortion clinics being bombed, excuse me. But I don't know how much that will happen, but I wouldn't be surprised to see that. And then I don't know, I can just see many in the suburbs. I know that politically the suburbs in the United States have been slowly becoming a bit more towards, like, they're a little more center left, because those in the suburbs now have received a bit more education than the previous generation. That tends to make you a bit more left leaning. However, I think if the quote unquote the woke culture just becomes too intense and too omnipresent, I can see people doing sort of a flight from like pulling their kids out of school and doing more homeschooling, maybe even moving to more red states or purple states. And also too, there are a lot of immigrants that come here from different different nations in places like Central America and the Middle East, who are very culturally conservative, and I could see that being a problem for the Democrats. Many Latinos from Central America are Catholic, obviously, and they are very anti-abortion. So I don't know. The Democrats will have to play that somewhat carefully. And now there are some polls coming out. I don't know how large the sample size is, but they're starting to show that there's more support among conservative support among Latinos than there ever has been in the past. It's like almost like 50-50, and some polls suggest it's something like 52-48 in favor of more favoring conservative parties and ideas and so on and so forth. So the Democrats will have to be careful about that, just strategically speaking. I think I'll keep it at that.
All right. So going back to the first scenario, which I outlined, where it is overturned and the states harden, and as you've said, Keith, in all likelihood, it'll just escalate the conflict throughout the country. This gets to the question: is abortion the issue that's going to be the spark that lights the second U.S. Civil War? Logos.
I don't think abortion is strong enough to be the one issue. Like, a lot of people like to liken it to slavery in the beginning of the first Civil War, but slavery wasn't just a moral issue, but it was like a genuine like economic issue, where like a lot of the country actually used slavery as like an economic way of life. And so slavery was as much of a moral question as it was a question of whether like factory production would have dominance over the current agricultural economy at the time. Abortion, I don't think has that ring to it by itself. It's certainly a question as morally weighty as slavery, but I don't think it has the economic oomph in terms of tariffs and all sorts of other issues that deal with the economic dimension. But I do think it will be a big issue in a bundle of issues that will certainly inflame tensions to bring things to that point. Like I think that plus the tech issue is going to be a big one. Because the tech issue, okay, let's put it this way. I think abortion plus education conjointly are probably going to be the moral and economic dimension that could bring us into civil war. Those two together, I think, are like slavery. And here's my reasoning for that. Abortion has the moral issue, but the education has the economic component in the sense that trades are doing pretty well, but increasingly, inflation and other things are making it such that if you don't have a job that like scales to millions of people, you're not going to make like a whole bunch of money. I've been talking to people all over about this, right? Like our economy seems to be having a preference for jobs that scale rather than jobs that don't. And in order to get to those tech jobs and other sorts of higher level administrative jobs, say, you have to go through the left's education system. And increasingly, that education system is serving as kind of like a filter or a litmus test for people that have their values. And you could see inklings of this back during Trump's election when the papers kept writing about the, quote, shy Trump voters, right? Those people in education that aren't agreeing with us when they're supposed to be agreeing with us, right? So it's very much taken for granted by the left that those who pass through the educational institutions are supposed to be their people. And if they're not doing a good enough job of making it so that they're their people. And that's why you're seeing a lot of crackdown in the schools about like, ODEI institutions and things like that. One of the reasons. But on the flip side of that, right, you have the student loan crisis because it's very, very expensive to get through the left's kind of litmus test to get access to the tech and administrative industries and things like that. And so now, in order to be one of the left's people, and increasingly, you're going to be one of the holders of a lot of student loan debt. And so now, what the left is going to want to do is reward the people who are statistically correlated with being their people by getting rid of some or all of that debt to alleviate that problem. Because if that debt becomes such a barrier to entry that education can't serve as the proper filtering system for the right people, then it's just not going to work. And so you're going to see a whole bunch of issues flare up all at once around education, as we have been, right? So K through 12 and K through 12 priming people to be kind of like social justice activists by the time they get to college. The state of college and how strong the administration is at cracking down on like ODEI stuff. The student loan bubble and how like it's very balkanized in each side and for against that is becoming a very partisan issue. And yeah, so I think abortion combined with all these separate wedge issues on education combined are going to set the stage for like this holistic, like economic battleground that will devour the country.
All right, Keith. So pan-anarchism, we can thank Alito for that. So how do you see this escalating to its consummation?
Well, I think that if Roe was overturned, or even if it's not, I think it's going to definitely escalate the culture war. It's not going to diminish it any, and it's already pretty intense. And the thing is, every issue nowadays is shaped in the according to the culture war narrative, even foreign policy. Like recently, they voted for the aid to Ukraine, $40 billion in aid to Ukraine. Every single Democrat in Congress, AOC, all of them voted for this. And I'm sure they did that because it was a pro-Biden vote, and you had a number of Republicans that voted against it. Probably it was just an anti-Biden vote. So everything now is shaped in terms of the culture war. Politics is the same way. Economics is the same way. Your economic label is your part of your cultural identity. So I think that this is going to continue to escalate, and I think that what Logo said it was very good. What we see now, and this is something a lot of people don't talk about. I have seen some commentators like Joel Kotkin and Michael Lind, Caleb Malpin talks about this, but we see a fragmentation going on in the U.S. elite along economic lines, where I think the best way to describe it is you have the traditional industrial business elite who are being eclipsed by a new elite that is new money. They don't come from outside the traditional elite. You have these tech giants. You have these guys like Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates, the people behind Google and Apple and and all of that. So you have the tech industry, you have the mass media, you have all these new technology-driven industries that have a class of newly rich that are from outside the traditional industrial elite. And they're kind of like the bourgeoisie of say the 19th century, 18th and 19th century, when they were able to challenge the power of the traditional aristocracy. And I think that's kind of what's going on. What we see is a conflict between the old elite and the new elite going on among the elite generally. And I think it breaks down to largely into the traditional industrial elite versus the new tech elite. And each of these different economic factions within the elite tries to rally sectors of the public behind them around social and cultural issues. One thing that we've seen is the growth of this professional managerial class, as Barbara Ehrenreich called it. And what that is basically what Thomas Piketty calls a Brahmin class. And that is you have this class of people now who are educated elites who are generally affluent or relatively affluent economically, but side with the left on so many things. Like in some of the other countries, for example, people from that class will vote for the Green parties and stuff like that. So we see the wider society fragmenting along economic lines, even within the elite, along cultural lines, along class lines. The division between rich and poor is the widest at any point in the last 100 years. Another thing is that one of the strongest determinants as to whether someone will vote Democrat or Republican is whether they have been through the university system. That's probably the single strongest indicator as whether or not someone's going to be a Democrat or Republican. If they have a college degree, they're more likely to be Democrat. That's probably the strongest marker. So we see a system where we have this new ruling class of tech elites and managerial elites that are college educated and hold to this generally cosmopolitan value system. And then you have what Michael Lind calls the lesser rich. For example, you have a lot of people that live in ex-urban areas that own a plumbing business, and they didn't go to college, but they're by conventional standards they're considered rich because they make $200,000 a year or something. A lot of the Republican base here in Virginia, where I live, it comes from those classes. You have these affluent ex-urban areas that are not college educated but well off economically. That was one of the things that put Glenn Youngkin in the governor's mansion. But all of these things that I'm describing represent the fragmentation of the wider society on all these different lines. And I don't really see that changing. There's nothing I can think of that could possibly come around that could reverse that. Like some people say, well, a national emergency could reverse it. No, it won't. We had one. It was called the pandemic. Right? The pandemic just made all that worse, because there was no agreement on how to respond to the pandemic. The pandemic itself became a culture war issue. Ukraine is in the news all the time now. That's a culture war issue. The Fox News people are being compared, like Tucker Carlson, they're being called Putin apologists and all that kind of stuff. The Democrats are now war hawks. So our society keeps on fragmenting, and I think wherever abortion goes, it's probably going to continue to fuel that. Abortion is one of the most contentious issues there is because it deals with basic existential values like what is life and that kind of stuff. When is it moral to take what is perceived to be human life? It seems like it's just going to be another bit of fuel in the fire.
All right, terminal philosophy.
Right. I have to echo a lot of that. I think it wouldn't just be abortion that creates the second U.S. Civil War. I think obviously we all agree that it's probably a combination, the combined effects of multiple factors. I think especially that's true to say for economics. If inflation gets much worse and the price of gas just keeps going up and the price of groceries goes up and there's less money to spend and there's less incentive to cooperatively go along with this broken system. And then on top of that, you're throwing kerosene on top of it, like, the potential for some new BS, monkeypox, or, who knows if, certain places in the world are going to reinstate some sort of COVID lockdown similar to China, and every cultural issue under the sun, with public, like K through 12, obviously pushing more like transgender, like transgender into the social sciences. Sorry, I should say transgenderism into the social sciences. It will just be a tidal wave of of multiple things that just sets both sides off. I think if the economic situation just gets as bad as it can possibly be, and all the cities run out of gasoline and all the grocery stores are empty, then you might see this large exodus of urban populations into more rural and suburban areas, and that could be a real that has a high potential to be violent and bloody. But for the time being, things are just on a gradual decline rather than this sort of we're about to head over the cliff. But I do it was about like 3 or 4 months ago that Deutsche Bank started releasing articles, and people that had former employers of Deutsche Bank had basically made the argument that the United States will suffer a economic recession anywhere from like 6 months from now to about 10 months from now. So it's like less than a year. Now, even if the timetable's off, I think we're certainly due for one, only because the Fed can't keep interest rates this low forever, and there's another housing bubble that's formed, and there's just too much on the table that there's no hitting rewind on the VCR player. For better or for worse, that is just something that I believe will eventually happen. And so, depending on how dire the economic situation will be, I think that is the main foundational factor that will motivate people to do crazy and violent things. Trying to think of anything else here. Overall, but to pin it all on one particular issue, no, I wouldn't say that. It's certainly a compounding effect from multiple factors that we've discussed here previously.
All right, Logos, final thoughts.
I think I don't know. I don't know if I have any final thoughts that we haven't kind of beaten to the dust already. Good talk. It seems that we're all roughly in agreement about where the country's going. I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. So I'll leave it to everybody else to decide.
All right, Keith Preston, final thoughts.
A few years ago, when people would ask me if I thought a civil war was on the way, I'd always say no, because I thought Americans were too lazy to fight a civil war. They'd be worrying about it canceling the Super Bowl or something. But now we've actually seen that. We've actually seen the impact of the pandemic and the lockdowns and all of that kind of stuff. And we had all the civil unrest that went on a couple of years ago. So I'm a lot less confident in that prediction now. I think that if we had a civil war in the United States, it would not necessarily be like the Civil War of the 1860s. It would be more like the time of Troubles in Northern Ireland, where during the time of Troubles, you didn't necessarily have a civil war the way a lot of people think of it, where the state literally collapses and massive numbers of refugees fleeing the country and that kind of stuff. Life was relatively normal for most people most of the time, except there was just a lot of violence. It's probably like it was probably like what it's like to live in some of the areas of the United States with the most violence. The ghetto type areas where you've got constant gang violence. I think you could have a situation like that in the United States very easily, where you have actual bombings by different political groups against each other, and shootings and gun battles in the street, where you have innocent people, like bystanders, get harmed and that kind of thing. Just like Chicago. I mean, that's what goes on in Chicago all the time with the crime culture. But I could see the political culture becoming that. Even if the state itself doesn't collapse into a civil war between rival factions, or the army doesn't fracture, you could have this ongoing, what's called fourth generation warfare violence between rival factions. And that's kind of what was going on in Northern Ireland in the 70s. So I could very easily see that evolving.
All right, terminal philosophy, final thoughts.
Yeah, well, Keith, you might still be right. Most Americans might still be too lazy to get off the couch to fight a civil war. I can't remember which stand-up comedian has said that it's not that the South won't rise again because they don't have the willingness to. It's that the South won't rise again because they have biscuits and gravy and 3 scrambled eggs for breakfast every morning. No one can get off the couch. So I don't know. The American diet probably has something to do with the inability to fight consistently, but. No, I really do think that things are just and it's again it's so it's almost like a worn out cliche to observe that things are just going to get worse before they get better, but it really is true, especially in this case. I mean, the cultural divide in the United States is just getting wider and wider, and of course that's going to generate violence. This is going to generate tension. I don't think it's going to be, as violent as, say, I don't know. I mean, it's hard. It would be hard to compare the coming wave of violence in the United States to certain wars, but I think that it will just gradually become worse and worse, and then what's going to happen is that. The states will become sanctuaries for people who are just, more culturally, politically motivated, because less and less people, apolitical normies are starting to have, politics shoved in their face more and more. And, friends that I've had years ago who didn't care about politics 5 years ago are now all of a sudden, showing me clips of, everything from Candace Owens to ContraPoints, and it's like this is stuff I've kind of seen and gone through already. So that just tells me that more and more people are just becoming more politically conscious. So I won't repeat anything I've said too much anymore here. But thanks for the good stream, and I'll see you guys next time.
All right, thank you, Logos, Keith, and Terminal Philosophy. This is Todd Lewis of the Praise of Philly podcast, signing off.